Security guard work had been my life's mainstay, a mostly unglamorous existence that at least kept the bills paid. Gas stations, convenience stores, the smaller shops, mostly just sitting, watching. But when I saw the advertisement for a night shift gig at the local mall, when I thought I'd finally stumbled onto something a bit better. The pay was genuinely good, better than anything I'd seen dangled in front of me in years. The hours weren't terrible either, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Just one building, and I figured it would be quiet, a cakewalk. How hard could it really be? But I could already picture myself kicked back in the security office, eyes glued to the cameras, patrolling a place too vast for the silence it held at night. But as I applied immediately, and the next day the phone rang. It was the manager, a Mr. Hensley, wanting to know if I could come in that afternoon for an interview. It all felt so sudden, but I wasn't about to question it. All I needed was the job, and the mall wasn't far from my place. I drove over, trying to shake off the feeling that this was happening too fast. Was the mall that desperate for a night guard? The interview itself was quick, almost rushed. Hensley asked about my experience, but it didn't feel like he was really listening. He rattled through the basics. Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, hourly patrols, nothing out of the ordinary. When it was done, he looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Can you start tonight?" That took me by surprise. Most places wanted time for paperwork, background checks, but I wasn't about to argue. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager. He looked genuinely relieved. "Great, we're understaffed," he admitted, rubbing his temples like the day had been one long torment. "The last few guards didn't last. I hope you'll be different." His words gave me pause. What did he mean by that? But before I could ask, he'd already thrust a key to the office into my hand, telling me to report at 11 p.m. sharp. The sooner I started, the sooner I got paid, I told myself. I shook his hand, left the office, and went home to grab a few hours of sleep before my shift. Arriving at the mall, I found it dark and utterly deserted. The parking lot, usually teeming with cars during the day, was almost entirely empty. A few scattered vehicles sat under the dim glow of the parking lights, but the space felt too large, too quiet. It made the building look like some sleeping giant, and for a split second, I considered just turning around and heading home. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. I brushed it off as first-day jitters and walked up to the employee entrance. Mr. Hensley was there to meet me at the door. He didn't say much, just led me through the winding corridors to the security office, repeating the basic protocols as we walked. The office itself was small, a cramped room at the back of the mall filled with screens displaying grainy footage from the cameras scattered around the building. "Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, he reminded me again. "Do your rounds, make sure nothing's out of place, the usual." He glanced at me before adding, "And keep an eye on the escalators in the play area. Things happen there sometimes." That last bit made me pause again. Things happen? He just waved a hand dismissively. Kids mostly trying to sneak in or mess around after hours. "You'll see." I nodded, though his tone made my skin crawl a little. He handed me a printed sheet of standard instructions, shook my hand again and said, "Good luck. I'll see you in the morning." Once he was gone, I was alone. The silence of the empty mall settled over me like a shroud. I took a seat in front of the monitors, flipping through the camera feeds. The escalators were still, the stores dark and empty. For a moment, I actually relaxed. It was just a mall. Nothing creepy about that, just a big empty building. After a few minutes, I felt a presence behind me. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. There, standing just beside me, was a janitor. He grinned, clearly amused by my reaction. "Didn't mean to scare you, buddy," he said, his voice light. "You must be the new guy." I let out a nervous laugh, trying to shake off the tension. "Yeah, that's me. I didn't know there was a janitor here at night." He shrugged. "They always keep one of us around to clean up, make sure everything's ready for the next day." His tone turned a bit more serious. "Just make sure you follow the rules." I blinked. "The rules? You mean the instructions?" He handed me a crumpled piece of paper, looking at me with an unsettling seriousness. "These aren't from the manager. These are the rules you'll need if you want to make it through the night. I unfolded the paper, half expecting some kind of joke, but the list of rules it contained was anything but funny. Rules to keep you safe at night. Rule 1. Check the security cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, but don't stare at the footage for too long. Rule 2. Never look directly at the mannequins after midnight. If the mannequins change position, leave the area immediately. I stared at the list, my gut tightening with discomfort. You're serious? The janitor's grin had vanished completely. I'm warning you. Follow the rules or you'll end up like the last guy. I tried to laugh it off again. You mean the last guard? He nodded, his eyes cold. He quit after one night. Okay, I said, stuffing the paper into my pocket without even checking the rest of the list, chuckling nervously. Well, I'm going to make my first round. The janitor stepped aside, giving me a long, lingering look before saying, "Take care." I nodded and left the office, but his words hung in the air like a chilling premonition with me. There was something unsettling about his tone. His gaze, a palpable fear radiating from him. Still, I refused to let some bizarre set of rules burrow its way into my psyche. It was barely past midnight when I commenced my patrol. The mall possessed an unsettling quality under the cloak of night, far more than I had anticipated. The subdued lighting painted elongated, distorted shadows across the tiled expanse. Every sound seemed amplified, reverberating with an unnerving clarity. My footfalls echoing against the walls, the monotonous drone of the fluorescent fixtures, the distant, almost mournful creaks and groans as the building settled into the stillness. As I proceeded down one of the main corridors, I consciously focused on the task at hand. The mall wasn't sprawling, but it was substantial enough to warrant regular surveillance. Numerous stores lined the hallways, some abandoned and hollow, others secured behind locked doors, their merchandise offering tantalizing glimpses from the darkness beyond the glass. A children's play area stood sentinel near the food court, utterly silent and still, the brightly colored plastic toys assuming a strange, almost macabre quality under the faint emergency lights. Further along, I could discern the escalators, frozen in their perpetual upward trajectory, like relics from a bygone, busier era. I was acclimating to the oppressive silence when a peculiar anomaly caught my attention in one of the clothing boutiques. The store's entrance stood wide open, an invitation into the inky depths. I halted, my flashlight beam sweeping across the darkened interior. Initially, nothing appeared amiss, but as I subtly adjusted the light's trajectory, I detected a flicker in my peripheral vision, a subtle shift, as if something or someone was concealed within the shadows. I pivoted my head to confront it directly, but the space was empty, save for a cluster of mannequins positioned near the back, as immobile as ever. I sighed, shaking my head in disbelief. It was nothing, merely my frayed nerves playing tricks on me. I wouldn't allow that janitor's unsettling list to infiltrate my thoughts. Then, I registered the sound. A faint, almost imperceptible rustling of fabric. My flashlight beam snapped back toward the mannequins, and there it was. One of them had undeniably shifted its position. It stood marginally closer now, subtly out of alignment with the others. I could feel my pulse begin to accelerate. "Hey, Mr. Janitor," I called out, more out of a sense of exasperation than anything else. This had to be some elaborate prank. He was likely observing me from the shadows, attempting to unnerve me. But there was no reply, only the soft, disquieting shuffle of fabric behind me once more. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam methodically scanning the mannequins, and that's when I registered it. One of them had altered its posture again, its head now oriented directly toward the exit. My breath caught in my throat. No one else was present. There was no conceivable way this was a deception. I retreated from the store rapidly. I had no desire to linger any longer than necessary. As I moved away, I continued to glance over my shoulder, and then I heard it. Footfalls. But not ordinary footfalls. These were heavy, awkward, like wood or plastic scraping against the polished floor. My heart began to pound against my ribs. I whirled around, and there it was, the same mannequin from the store. It stood squarely in the middle of the hallway, staring at me with its vacant, lifeless expression. The hairs on the back of my neck bristled. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I watched it slowly, stiffly begin to advance toward me. Its joints creaking and groaning with each deliberate step. Its movements were robotic, jerky, like a doll being propelled forward by some unseen force. I reacted as any rational individual would. I fled. I spun on my heel and bolted down the hallway, my footfalls echoing in the vast, desolate expanse of the mall. I disregarded any semblance of composure. My only imperative was to escape that thing. I rounded the corner, diving into the corridor that led toward the restrooms. The footfalls behind me had ceased, but I didn't dare risk a backward glance. I burst into the restroom, splashing cold water on my face, desperately attempting to convince myself that it was all a figment of my imagination. But as I gazed into the mirror, I registered something else. A woman was standing near the stalls, her back toward me, clad in the unadorned uniform of a cleaning lady. I blinked and she had vanished. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around, but the space was vacant. The restroom was deserted. I collapsed to my knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and terror. What was transpiring? I struggled to collect my thoughts, to impose some semblance of order on the chaos, but nothing added up. Then the list resurfaced in my memory. I retrieved the crumpled paper from my pocket and unfolded it with trembling hands. There, inscribed plainly in black ink, were the next few directives. Rule 3. Asterisk: if a mannequin looks like it's following you, don't look back. Mannequins sometimes follow guards, but if you ignore them, they'll stop. If you look, they'll know you're aware, and they'll get closer. Asterisk: I felt my heart plummet. I had looked. Rule 4. Avoid looking into the mirrors of the restroom. Too late for that. My stomach churned as I realized I had already violated 2 of the cardinal rules. Whatever malevolent force was at play, I was exacerbating the situation. Rule 5. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. I swallowed hard. I hadn't heard any voices yet, but merely knowing the rule existed instilled a profound sense of unease. Rule 6. If you hear a child laughing from the play area, leave immediately. Rule 7. If you check the time and it's earlier than the last time you looked, immediately return to the security office. I glanced at my watch instinctively, checking the time. It read 11:30 p.m. My blood turned to ice. There was no way it was 11:30. I had commenced my patrol after midnight, and considerable time had elapsed since then. This was an impossibility. I didn't require a second prompting. I bolted from the restroom, my heart racing as I made my way back toward the security office. The air around me seemed heavier now, more oppressive, and the lights overhead flickered faintly. The mall, once a place I had thought would be quiet and safe, now felt like a living entity, watching and waiting. I reached the office, slamming the door behind me, my breathing ragged, my nerves frayed. I checked my watch again. It was almost 1 a.m. That seemed right, but what had happened earlier? Why had the time changed like that? I sat down, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed to keep my head on straight. I wasn't going to let this place get to me. I pulled out the list again, reading through the remaining rules. Rule 8. Lock the security office door between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. and do not open it for anyone. If they knock, they might not be the person you think they are. Check the cameras to confirm. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Watch the area on the security cameras. Rule 11. Under no circumstances should you leave before your shift ends. If you do, you risk something following you outside the mall. I let out a nervous laugh. What kind of job had I taken? Who had written these rules? I couldn't make sense of any of it, but as I sat there, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. The mannequin, the time shifting, the figure in the mirror, this wasn't normal. Whatever was going on, I needed to survive the night. It was past 1 a.m., and I needed to go for another round. As much as I wanted to stay locked in the security office, I knew I had to follow the security protocols. Also, the cameras showed nothing unusual, so I gathered my courage and stepped back out into the mall. As I walked cautiously through the main hallway, I started hearing something. A faint mumbling coming from an abandoned store. My blood ran cold as I remembered Rule 5. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding in my chest. The mumbling sound coming from the abandoned store was quiet, barely audible over the faint hum of the mall's air conditioning, but it was unmistakable. There was someone or something talking inside. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling like lead. Rule 5 echoed in my head. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. I tried to block out the sound, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the soft, incomprehensible murmurs persisted, growing louder the closer I got to the store. I glanced at the glass storefront. The windows were covered with paper, blocking any view of the inside. My breath hitched as I quickened my pace, refusing to even glance in its direction. I didn't want to know what was behind those papers or what was causing that sound. The voice was rising now, clearer but still distorted, like someone talking underwater. I had to get away. I made it past the store, refused to look back. The voice began to fade, and I felt the tension in my body ease slightly. But as I turned the corner and entered the next corridor, I heard it again. Footsteps, but not normal footsteps. They were rough, uneven, like the dragging sound of something solid scraping against the floor, almost like wood or plastic. My stomach twisted. I knew what it was before I even turned around. It was the mannequin. My instinct screamed at me not to look back, remembering Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, don't look back. If you ignore them, they'll stop. If you look, they'll know you're aware and they'll get closer. I walked faster, keeping my eyes straight ahead, trying to ignore the growing sound of the mannequin's movements behind me. Each step it took seemed heavier, more deliberate. My heart raced as the footsteps grew closer, but I didn't dare turn around. Just keep walking, I told myself. The sound of the mannequin's movement grew fainter, and eventually, I could no longer hear it. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and slowed my pace. My hands were shaking, but at least I had followed the rule. Whatever was following me had stopped for now. Then I heard something else. The distant hum of machinery, an escalator running. I froze, the blood draining from my face. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Watch the area on the security cameras. I turned on my heel and bolted for the security office. I wasn't going to risk breaking another rule, especially after what I had just been through. My mind raced as I rushed back down the hallway, past the now quiet abandoned store, and toward the safety of the security office. I could hear the escalator in the distance, that unmistakable mechanical whir, but I didn't stop. I burst into the office, slammed the door behind me, and locked it, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I immediately turned my attention to the security monitors, flipping through the camera feeds. The escalator camera came into view, and there it was, a figure. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was something else. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs long and spindly, its face obscured by shadows. It was standing on the escalator, its body stiff and jerky, moving in slow, unnatural movements as the steps carried it upward. I stared at the screen, frozen in place, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. The figure's head turned slowly, as if sensing something, and then, impossibly, it looked straight at the camera, straight at me. The monitors started flickering, static filling with my heart hammering against my ribs. I retraced my steps towards the sanctuary of the security office. The atmosphere had thickened, pressing down on me with palpable weight, and the overhead lights pulsed with a sickly, uncertain glow. The mall, which I had naively envisioned as a haven of quietude and security, now resembled a sentient entity, lurking in the shadows, patiently biding its time. I stumbled into the office, the door slamming shut behind me like a desperate plea. My breath came in ragged gasps, my nerves stretched taut as violin strings. Another glance at my watch confirmed the time. Almost 1 a.m. It felt right, yet the temporal anomaly still clawed at the edges of my sanity. How could the time have shifted so drastically? I sank into the chair, fighting to still the tremor in my hands. I needed to maintain a semblance of composure to resist the insidious influence of this place. Retrieving the list, I scanned the remaining rules, each one a stark warning etched in ink. Rule 8. Secure the security office door between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. and do not, under any circumstances, open it. Should a knock sound, be warned. They may not be who they appear to be. Verify their identity via the security cameras. Rule 9. If you are accosted by the sound of weeping emanating from a dressing room, do not open the door. Rule 10. Should you hear the telltale hum of an escalator in motion, refrain from investigation. Monitor the area through the security cameras. Rule 11. Under no circumstances are you to abandon your post before the designated end of your shift. To do so is to risk attracting unwanted attention, potentially leading to something following you beyond the confines of the mall. A hollow laugh escaped my lips, laced with a potent cocktail of fear and disbelief. What manner of employment had I stumbled into? Who had conceived these bizarre and unsettling rules? Logic offered no solace, and as I sat there, the cumulative weight of the evening's events threatened to crush me. The mannequin's unsettling presence, the manipulation of time, the spectral figure in the mirror, none of this aligned with the natural order. Whatever malevolent force was at play, survival was paramount. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., signaling the commencement of another patrol. Despite my overwhelming desire to remain barricaded within the security office, I recognized the necessity of adhering to the established protocols. Furthermore, the cameras betrayed no sign of unusual activity, bolstering my resolve. I steeled my nerves and ventured back into the labyrinthine corridors of the mall. As I cautiously navigated the main hallway, a faint, unsettling sound reached my ears. A barely audible mumbling drifting from the depths of an abandoned store. A chilling premonition gripped me as Rule 5 flashed through my mind. I froze, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. The mumbling, though faint, was unmistakable, cutting through the monotonous hum of the mall's ventilation system. Someone or something was engaged in hushed conversation within the confines of the darkened store. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I forced my leaden legs to move. The chilling words of Rule 5 echoed in my thoughts. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. I desperately attempted to shut out the sound, clinging to the hope that it was merely a figment of my overwrought imagination. But the soft, incomprehensible murmurs persisted, growing louder with each step I took towards the source. My gaze darted towards the store's glass frontage. The windows were obscured by sheets of paper, effectively blocking any view of the interior. A gasp escaped my lips as I quickened my pace, resolutely averting my eyes. I couldn't bear to contemplate what lurked behind those paper barriers, or what unholy entity was giving voice to those unsettling sounds. The voice intensified, becoming clearer, yet retaining a distorted quality, akin to someone speaking from beneath the surface of water. Escape was imperative. I hurried past the store, refusing to yield to the temptation of looking back. The voice began to recede, and a sliver of tension dissipated from my body. But as I rounded the corner and entered the adjacent corridor, another sound assaulted my ears. Footsteps. These were not the steady, rhythmic footfalls of a living being, but rather a rough, uneven dragging sound, as if something solid were scraping against the polished floor, perhaps wood or plastic. A sickening dread churned in my stomach. I knew, with chilling certainty, what awaited me around the bend. It was the mannequin. Every instinct screamed at me to maintain my forward trajectory, to heed the dire warning of Rule 3. If a mannequin appears to be following you, do not look back. If you ignore them, they will cease their pursuit. To acknowledge their presence is to invite them closer. I quickened my pace, fixing my gaze straight ahead, desperately trying to drown out the growing sound of the mannequin's approach. Each step it took seemed heavier, more deliberate, imbued with a sinister intent. My heart threatened to burst from my chest as the footsteps drew nearer, but I dared not succumb to the temptation of turning around. "Just keep walking. Just keep walking," I silently chanted, a desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness. Gradually, the sound of the mannequin's movements began to fade, until finally, it vanished altogether. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and tentatively slowed my pace. My hands trembled uncontrollably, but at least I had adhered to the rule. Whatever malevolent entity had been pursuing me had, for the moment, ceased its advance. Then, a new sound pierced the silence. The distant hum of machinery, the unmistakable whir of an escalator in motion. I froze, every drop of blood draining from my face. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Monitor the area through the security cameras. Without hesitation, I spun on my heel and sprinted back towards the perceived safety of the security office. I couldn't risk violating another rule, not after the harrowing experiences I had already endured. My mind raced as I retraced my steps down the hallway, past the now silent abandoned store, and towards my intended destination. The mechanical whir of the escalator grew louder with each stride, but I pressed on, driven by a primal urge for self-preservation. I burst through the door of the security office, slamming it shut and engaging the lock, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Immediately, I turned my attention to the bank of security monitors, frantically flipping through the camera feeds. The escalator camera flickered to life, revealing a scene that sent a jolt of pure terror through my veins. There, standing on the ascending escalator, was a figure. It was not a person, not in the conventional sense. It was something else entirely. Tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that were grotesquely long and spindly, its face obscured by the impenetrable shadows. Its body was stiff and jerky, moving in a series of slow, unnatural contortions as the steps carried it upward. I stared at the screen, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, my mind struggling to process the unholy spectacle before me. The figure's head turned slowly, as if sensing my presence, and then, impossibly, it locked its gaze directly on the camera, directly on me. The monitors erupted in a chaotic symphony of flickering lights and static. The screens flared, a brutal buzzing tearing through the confines of the room. I wrenched my gaze from the camera's hypnotic pull, the first rule echoing in my mind like a death knell. Don't stare at the footage for too long. The buzzing choked itself off almost instantly, and when I risked a glance back at the monitors, the escalator stood empty, a silent metal serpent. The figure had vanished, swallowed by the mall's insatiable darkness. I slumped back into my chair, a tremor seizing my limbs. I couldn't endure this charade a moment longer. My nerves were frayed to breaking, and the rules, those godforsaken rules, felt like a twisted game crafted to dismantle my sanity piece by piece. Just had to make it through the night, a handful of hours separating me from dawn. I repeated to myself like a mantra. The subsequent hours bled into one another, a monotonous stretch of silence. I remained barricaded within the security office, too profoundly shaken to contemplate another patrol. My eyes darted ceaselessly to the monitors, scrutinizing the deserted hallways, the dormant stores, the escalator now frozen in its metallic slumber. An eerie calm blanketed everything, yet the air in the office hung thick with an almost palpable tension. Then, a sound knifed through the silence, sending a glacial wave of dread cascading down my spine. A knock at the door. I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to burst free. I froze, my eyes frantically scanning the security monitors, searching for any sign of life in the hallway outside the office. Utterly deserted. But the knock resonated again, 3 sharp, insistent raps against the door's solid surface, as if an unseen presence stood just beyond the threshold. And then I heard a voice, laced with a chilling familiarity. "Hey, how's the night going? Still think the rules are funny?" It was the janitor, or at least a disturbingly accurate imitation of him. I swallowed hard, the 8th rule surfacing in my memory with terrifying clarity. Asterisk locked the security office door between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., and do not open it for anyone. If they knock, they might not be the person you think they are. Check the cameras to confirm. I glanced at the clock, its digital display mocking me with the time. 4:03 a.m. My heart thundered in my chest as I desperately checked the camera feed again. The hallway outside the office remained stubbornly empty, an impossible void, yet the knocking persisted, growing more insistent with each repetition. The janitor's voice echoed through the door, sounding almost jovial, yet subtly, irrevocably wrong. "Come on, open up. I'll tell you what's really going on here." I remained paralyzed, my hand hovering mere inches from the door handle, caught in a vortex of conflicting impulses. My mind raced, desperately trying to reconcile the familiar voice with the chilling implications of the rules. It sounded like the janitor, but I knew better than to trust my senses at this point. I checked the camera again, a futile gesture. Still nothing. The hallway was a pristine, undisturbed void. Couldn't open the door. I wouldn't. The knocking ceased abruptly, plunging the office back into an oppressive silence. I released a shaky breath, the tension slowly leaching from my muscles. I remained glued to the camera, unwilling to move, until finally, the janitor materialized on the screen. He stood directly outside the door now, his gaze locked onto the camera's lens, piercingly. He knocked again, his face contorted into an unsettling, almost predatory grin. I felt my stomach plummet. The way he stared so intently, so knowingly into the camera. It felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong. His body began to waver, as if he were composed of smoke and shadows, and then, slowly, agonizingly, he dissipated into the air, leaving behind nothing but an empty hallway, a silent testament to the horrors lurking within the mall's heart. I checked the clock. 4:30 a.m., whatever it had been, it was gone, banished by the relentless march of time. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air seemed to still, the oppressive weight that had been crushing me beginning to lift, if only incrementally. I could feel the tension ebbing from my shoulders, though my body remained coiled tight, like a compressed spring primed to unleash. I rose to my feet, my muscles protesting from being hunched over the monitors for so long. I needed to stretch my legs, to move, to break free from the suffocating dread that clung to me like a second skin. After the night's relentless horrors, I wasn't eager to embark on another full patrol, but remaining confined within the office felt equally unbearable. Perhaps a brief walk, confined to the immediate vicinity of the office, would help clear the fog that had settled over my mind. The mall remained deathly still, the faint hum of electricity the only sound that dared to break the silence that permeated the corridors. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift with a life of their own as I walked. I kept my gaze lowered, desperately trying to avoid focusing on the lifeless mannequins, the silent stores, the oppressive stillness that had settled over everything. As I rounded the corner near the security office, I nearly leaped out of my skin, my heart seizing in my chest. The janitor stood there, leaning casually against the wall, sporting that same unsettlingly friendly grin he'd worn the first time we met. It was the real janitor this time, at least I desperately hoped it was. He seemed more substantial, more human, than the spectral apparition I'd witnessed earlier in the night. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice light, almost teasing, as if he were commenting on a minor inconvenience. I stood there, speechless, my mind reeling as I desperately tried to reconcile the horrifying events of the past few hours. The knocks, the dissolving figure, with the seemingly ordinary man standing before me now. "You could say that," I managed to mutter, struggling to maintain a semblance of composure. He tilted his head, his grin faltering slightly, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "You followed the rules, didn't you?" I tried. I croaked, my throat suddenly parched. "What is this place? Why are these rules even a thing?" The janitor emitted a low chuckle, but it lacked the warmth and friendliness it had possessed earlier in the night. This laugh was hollow, tinged with a chilling undercurrent of something darker, something malevolent. "I told you, the rules are there to keep you safe," he said, his eyes narrowing, his gaze intensifying. "There's more going on here than you understand. Much more." I took a step backward, my unease escalating with each word he uttered. "What do you mean? What's going on in this mall?" He shrugged, the unsettling grin returning to his face as if nothing untoward had transpired. "You'll figure it out, or maybe you won't. Either way, there's no escaping it." He began to walk away, turning down the dimly lit corridor without so much as another word. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he weren't in any particular hurry to leave, as if he knew I was tethered to this place as much as he was. I couldn't simply let it go. I needed to know what he was talking about. I needed answers, even if they were answers I didn't want to hear. "Wait!" I called after him, my voice echoing down the corridor. "Wait!" I called after him, my voice echoing down the empty hallway. "What do you mean, no escaping it? What are you trying to say?" The janitor didn't stop, didn't even falter. He just kept walking, his footsteps eerily silent on the tiled floor. A knot of desperation and frustration tightened in my gut, and before I could fully process it, I found myself following him, driven by a desperate need for some kind of explanation. I hurried around the corner after him, but when I emerged into the next section of hallway, it was empty. He'd vanished again, swallowed by the mall's oppressive silence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood there, staring down the seemingly endless corridor. There was no logical way he could have disappeared that quickly. He had been right there just moments ago. I frantically looked around, scanning the area for any sign of him, but the mall had retreated into its unsettling quiet. And then I heard it, a soft, muffled crying. At first, the sound was faint, barely audible, but as I stood frozen in place, it grew louder, more distinct. It was a woman's voice, a quiet, heart-wrenching sob echoing through the desolate space. A wave of unease washed over me, prickling my skin. I knew the rules. They were etched into my memory by now, and I knew exactly what this was. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. I swallowed hard, trying to shut out the sound, but the crying persisted, insistent and mournful. It seemed to be emanating from one of the stores further down the hallway, the muffled sobs echoing faintly through the deserted corridors. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to retreat back to the relative safety of the security office and wait out the last, agonizing hour of my shift in silence. But there was something about the crying that exerted a strange pull, an almost magnetic force that made it nearly impossible to ignore. What if someone was genuinely in need of help? What if this was all just a figment of my overactive imagination? What if the rules were nothing more than some elaborate, cruel joke? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear and exhaustion clouding my thoughts. I had already violated too many of the rules tonight. This wasn't a joke. The janitor had warned me, and I wasn't about to disregard his words now. But still, the crying continued, growing louder, more insistent, the sound echoing from somewhere deeper within the store just ahead. It didn't sound right. It was too hollow, too distorted, like a recording of someone crying rather than the genuine sound of human sorrow. I stood there, paralyzed by the conflicting forces of curiosity and fear, until finally, the decision was made for me. The crying ceased abruptly, cut off as if someone had thrown a switch. Silence descended, heavier and more profound than before. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the very walls of the mall were closing in. My chest tightened, and I realized I had been unconsciously holding my breath. Then, slowly, a figure materialized on one of the security camera feeds I had been monitoring through the corridor. Even though I had left the office, the cameras were still linked to my device. I found myself unable to tear my eyes away from the screen as I watched her. A woman unnaturally pale, with long, dark hair that hung limply, obscuring her face, concealing her features in shadow. She was dressed in plain, outdated clothing, her body hunched over as she moved slowly down the hallway, her feet barely skimming the ground. She was floating. My heart leapt into my throat, constricting my airway as I watched her approach the dressing room, her body drifting closer to the entrance, her shoulders shaking with silent, unseen sobs. She hovered just outside the door, as if waiting, beckoning me to follow her inside. I instinctively took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't real. Simply couldn't be. I had witnessed strange, unsettling things tonight, but this was something else entirely, something that defied all logic and reason. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately willing the figure to vanish, to leave me alone in the oppressive silence. When I opened them again, she was gone, but the crying had started anew, this time emanating from right behind me. I didn't hesitate, didn't even think. I bolted down the hallway, running as fast as my legs could carry me, driven by pure, unadulterated terror. The sound of the woman's cries echoed through the desolate halls, growing louder and more desperate with every step I took. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare risk another glance at the unearthly apparition. All I knew was that I needed to escape, to get out of there now, before it was too late. By the time I stumbled back into the security office, I was breathless, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. I slammed the door shut behind me, fumbling with the lock until it clicked into place, and then collapsed into the chair in front of the bank of monitors. My chest heaved with each ragged breath, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal with no way out, clinging to the faint hope that my shift would end soon. I glanced up at the monitors, and my heart plummeted. There she was, the woman, the same pale figure, her hair still obscuring her face, moving with that unnatural, hovering gait. She was no longer simply roaming the halls aimlessly. She was headed directly toward the security office. My blood ran cold as I watched her on the monitors. Her image burned into my retinas. She floated down the hallway, closer and closer, her slow, jerky movements unnerving in their unnaturalness. She didn't walk like a normal person. She barely moved her feet at all, gliding just above the ground as if propelled by some unseen force. The sobbing was gone, but the suffocating weight of her presence was almost palpable. It was as if the very air around her shimmered and distorted with her approach, bending the fabric of reality itself. I frantically checked the camera feeds, desperately flipping between angles, searching for some way to escape, some way to break free. She was getting closer. My breath quickened as I watched her drift past the darkened storefronts, her face still hidden by her hair, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Every second brought her nearer, and I felt my panic rising, clawing at my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. I reached for the list of rules, gripping it tightly in my trembling hands as if it were a lifeline. "Don't open the door!" I repeated the thought over and over in my head like a desperate mantra. "Don't open the door, no matter what." The woman stopped just outside the security office. I could see her clearly now on the monitor, by her hair, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Every second brought her nearer, and I felt my panic rising, clawing at my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. I reached for the list of rules, gripping it tightly in my trembling hands as if it were a lifeline. "Don't open the door!" I repeated the thought over and over in my head like a desperate mantra. "Don't open the door, no matter what." The woman stopped just outside the security office. I could see her clearly now on the monitor, the camera trained right on the door. She stood there, utterly silent and motionless, like some kind of macabre statue. For a fleeting moment, I dared to entertain the hope that she would simply leave, that maybe she'd just fade away, a figment of a bad dream. But then the knocking started, so soft at first, barely audible, just a tap. But each knock grew progressively louder, more forceful, until it felt as if the entire door was rattling in its frame. My pulse hammered in my ears, a deafening roar that drowned out every other sound. She was there, just inches away on the other side of that thin barrier, and I could feel her presence like a cold, oppressive weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. I checked the monitor again, praying with every fiber of my being that she would vanish, but she didn't. Her body remained rigid, completely unmoving, yet the knocking continued relentlessly, growing louder and more violent with each agonizing second. The The door frame shook violently, as if it wouldn't hold much longer against the assault. I clamped my hands tightly over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut with all my might, desperately trying to block her out, to shut out the sound, the image, everything. This couldn't be real. Simply couldn't be real. But the knocking only grew more intense, more insistent, like someone was pounding with their bare fists. My heart raced wildly in my chest, my body trembling uncontrollably as I stared fixedly at the door, completely unable to move, paralyzed by fear. Then I heard it. "Hey, open up. It's the manager." I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Mr. Hensley, but something about it felt profoundly wrong, deeply unsettling. I glanced at the clock, my heart thundering against my ribs. 6:01 a.m. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me weak, but suspicion crept in immediately, tainting the relief. Was it really him out there? Or was this just another cruel trick? Another layer of the nightmare? I checked the camera one last time, desperately seeking reassurance. The woman was gone, vanished without a trace. No sign of the pale figure, no shadow, no lingering presence. "Everything okay in there?" Mr. Hensley's voice called again, sounding closer now, and laced with a tone of genuine concern. "Open up, your shift's over." I hesitated, my hand hovering uncertainly over the cold metal of the door handle. I had survived the night, hadn't I? The clock confirmed it was past 6 a.m., and nothing had come for me in those final, terrifying moments. But the events of the night had shaken me to my very core, leaving me raw and vulnerable, and I wasn't ready to trust anything, anyone, without performing one final, desperate check. I glanced at the monitor one last time, double-checking the security feed outside the office, and there he was, Mr. Hensley standing just outside the door, looking exactly as he had when I first met him. No eerie figure lurking behind him, no distorted features, just him, the manager. With a trembling hand, I finally unlocked the door and pulled it open. Mr. Hensley stood there, his expression immediately softening as he registered the look of sheer terror etched across my face. "Rough night, huh?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I nodded slowly, still trying to process the night's events, still reeling from the fear. "Yeah, you could definitely say that." He frowned, noticing the stark look of fear etched across my face. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that barely escaped my lips. Something like that. I didn't go into detail. I didn't tell him about the mannequin or the crying woman in the security footage. It didn't seem real anymore, not even to me. I was just overwhelmingly grateful that the night was finally over. But something gnawed at me, a desperate need for answers, something that I absolutely needed to know before I left this place for good. "What about the janitor?" I asked suddenly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "The one who works the night shift?" Mr. Hensley looked at me, genuinely puzzled. "What janitor?" My stomach dropped like a stone, a cold dread settling in my gut. "The one who was here all night." He gave me a list of rules to follow. Mr. Hensley shook his head slowly, his expression turning serious, almost grave. "There's no night janitor. No one works here at night except you." My mind reeled, struggling to grasp the implications of his words. The pieces simply didn't fit together. None of it made any sense. I stared at Mr. Hensley, my thoughts racing, colliding with each other in a chaotic jumble. If there was no janitor, then who or what had been warning me? And the rules, where on earth had they come from? I didn't ask any more questions. I simply handed him my keys, quit on the spot, and walked swiftly out of the mall without ever looking back. Whatever had happened there, whatever malevolent presence lurked in the dark corners of that godforsaken place, I wasn't going to stick around to find out anymore. As I drove away, the oppressive weight of the night still heavy on my chest, I realized with a chilling certainty that some places are better left alone, undisturbed. And that mall, it was undeniably one of them. I will never, ever return to that place again.